All right, so this is the last video. We're going to talk about emotion and stress. Okay, so let's see. All right, so there are some different theories for emotion you need to know. There are three big ones. Okay, so you have James Lang, you have Cannon-Bard, and you have two-factor Schachter-Singer theories. So you do need to know these three, and you need to know them pretty well. The big thing with James Lang is it's 1, 2, 3. Okay, so 1 is the stimulus, you know, the oncoming car. 2 is the arousal, the physiological symptoms. Heart starts pounding, breathing increases, whatever. And then 3 is the emotion. So it is 1, 2, and 3. Stimulus, arousal, emotion. And I would know that. Stimulus, arousal, emotion. 1, 2, and 3, James Lang. So the emotion doesn't come until after the physiological for James Lang. Part of James Lang, mostly because it was a theory of William James, is the facial feedback hypothesis. And this basically talks about how the physiological state of your face can influence your emotions. Okay, so, you know, I'm not always in a good mood, but if I smile, I can start to then feel better because I am smiling. So, you know, the arousal, the smile, would then precede the emotion, which is happiness. So the idea that the state of your face, your emotion on your face, can actually influence how you feel, your emotion. Okay, so this is just something to keep in mind. I think there's a question on it. Okay, Cannon-Bard. All right, so basically this is, you can think like two cannons firing at the same time. All right, because it's not 1, 2, and 3. It's 1 and then 2, and it's both happening at the same time. So the stimulus occurs, and then the physiological arousal and the emotion occur simultaneously. Okay, so I think I have something on here. You can think like two cannons firing at the same time. The two things are the physiological and the emotion happen simultaneously. It's not stimulus and then physiological and then emotion like James Lang. It's stimulus and then physiological and emotion at the same time. Okay, so that's simultaneous. All right, two-factor because there's two factors, the arousal and then the cognitive appraisal or the cognitive label, which is something that the other theories don't have. Another name is Schachter-Singer for the psychologists, but you may see either way. This adds in the part that the other two don't have, which is the cognitive label. Sometimes you'll see cognitive label, sometimes you'll see cognitive appraisal, but basically this is literally saying I am something, labeling the thought about what it is. And the reason they said that this is a thing is because sometimes we have the physiological arousal, but we don't necessarily have the emotion that would go with it. So for example, I can be on a roller coaster and my heart can be pounding, but if I cognitively appraise that situation as I'm excited, you know, I'm not scared, I'm excited, then my emotion won't be fear, my emotion might be excitement. So the cognitive label kind of makes a difference according to two-factor. So the two factors, you have 1, stimulus, and then you have 2, which is the two factors, the physiological and the cognitive label. This is why we get 2 factors, and then third comes the emotion, because the actual emotion that is experienced depends on how you think about it and the labeling, the cognitive appraisal of that in your mind. All right. Good. Okay, so I'm going to skip through some of these. Stress. Okay, your stress hormone, stress can cause you to gain weight. It can do a lot of bad things to you. We talked about type A versus type B. Type A is more prone to stress. Type B is more relaxed. Type A is more prone to heart disease because they don't tend to deal with stress as well. Type B might be a little lazier, but they tend to be less prone to heart disease. So we want to talk just a little bit about general adaptation syndrome. You need to know the 3 stages. Absolutely have to. I remember GAS-R. GAS-R. General adaptation syndrome, GAS-R. Alarm, resistance, exhaustion. Alarm, resistance, exhaustion. Gotta absolutely know this. This will be on your AP exam for sure. GAS-R. Okay, and he talked about how we go through these 3 stages when we experience any stressor. The first is alarm. This is, kind of where we're starting to deal with this stressor. This is oftentimes where fight or flight kicks in when you're dealing with this, and your body might give you the extra energy that you need to get through whatever stressor. And then this resistance phase is where you're adapting and you're coping and you're dealing with it. Eventually, once the stressor has passed, you reach exhaustion. This is what we talked about with a lot of college kids who get sick at the end of finals week, is because they've depleted all their body's resources and they're running on empty, and then they reach this exhaustion phase. And the important thing to remember is that exhaustion makes you vulnerable. All right, the state where you are most vulnerable to illness, the state where you are even most vulnerable to collapse or death, is exhaustion. All right, so it's really important that you try to get rest when you need it and make sure that you don't reach this exhaustion phase. Okay, the last part of this is going back to emotion, is this universal emotion piece. Paul Ekman is the researcher that did the research on display rules and found that there are certain rules for how we display emotion, and there are universal emotions. So he studied facial expressions, and he found that throughout all cultures, there are, I think there's 7 emotions that are universally displayed and look the same for anyone, regardless of culture. However, he did find that while facial expressions can be universal and emotions can be displayed universally, gestures, so the way that you use your hands when you talk or body language or whatever, are culture specific. Okay, so there are differences in gestures for different cultures, but there are similar facial expressions. So that's something to keep in mind. And I think that was pretty much it. You need to know Paul Ekman. He's really been very influential in studying emotions, and he's the first that has categorized all the different facial movements and facial expressions. I know my class, we watched a video on that, but basically this idea of universal emotions and how humans do, to a certain extent, show their emotions the same way, but gestures are different for each culture. So, okay, there are just a few other little things on here, like your immune system and fighting off illness and knowing the lymphocytes, things like that. What is involved in fight or flight? What are some parasympathetic and sympathetic responses? But that's stuff that we did before, so you should remember that. Remember, parasympathetic parachutes you back down to homeostasis. So that's all the going back to normal things. But other than that, I think that's pretty much it, and you should be pretty prepared, and I think this should be pretty easy for you. So happy studying!